You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Late last week, we found out officially that the ACC is going to change up its basketball schedule. Now, in case you missed it, they are going from 20 conference games for every team to now 18 conference games for every team. That means that every ACC team next season is going to play in 2 more non-conference games than they were supposed to. And of course, because Syracuse basketball is in the ACC, this applies to them. The reason the ACC is doing this is to essentially get more teams into the NCAA tournament, because if you beat up on bad non-conference teams by 30 points, it's actually really beneficial as far as the net rankings and KenPom and all the advanced metrics to determine which teams should get in the NCAA tournament and which teams should be left out. So that's why the ACC is ultimately doing this. Now, this is a Syracuse show, so we will talk about this from a Syracuse angle. What should Syracuse do with its 2 extra non-conference games next season? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments section below right now. Should Syracuse schedule 2 more quote-unquote cupcakes next season, or should they schedule a couple more tough Power 5 conference games? Here's my answer, okay? Because I asked you all, and I'd love for you to comment in the comments section below, and I'll get back to you. I don't really care what Syracuse decides to do. And I'll tell you why in just a moment here. But what Syracuse really needs to focus on next season is being better as a team, just from a team perspective, if that makes sense. Because last season, it didn't really matter who Syracuse basketball was playing. So let's go over the quote-unquote cupcakes, right? Sure, Syracuse could use its 2 extra non-con games to schedule a couple of opponents that they should be able to crush, right? They could do that. And that'll certainly be beneficial to Syracuse and any team in the ACC that decides to do it, because, again, beating them by 30-plus points is really going to help your NCAA tournament chances. But against non-Power 5 schools last season, here were Syracuse basketball's results. They beat Lemoyne by 4, Colgate by 2, Youngstown State by 9, but that was in double overtime, Cornell by 10, UAlbany by 17, Bucknell by 12. The average margin of victory for Syracuse basketball in their non-con, non-Power 5 games last season was 9 points. So Syracuse next year, if they want, they could schedule more of those type of games where you're playing more Youngstown States and you're playing more Lemoyne's and Bucknells. You could do that if you're Syracuse. But it really only helps you if you dominate against those cupcakes. Because if you don't, they actually hurt the team significantly. If you recall, when the net rankings first came out, and the net doesn't come out until a couple of weeks into the college basketball season, but Syracuse was down in the 170s in the first net rankings a year ago, in large part because they barely were able to beat those teams like Lemoyne and Youngstown State at the beginning of the season. They already put themselves in a hole that was pretty much impossible to overcome as far as making the NCAA tournament. So Syracuse basketball next year, if they want to do that, the only way it's going to help them is if they beat them by 20 to 30 points. Now, you could sit here and say, well, let's do Power 5 opponents, teams that should actually be good next season. I think many of you, including myself, we would love to see Syracuse go up against some old Big East rivals. You'd love to see them go against UConn and St. John's, and the schedule allows them to do that. If they wanted to schedule against those teams, I'm sure those teams won't necessarily say no, and we could have a Syracuse St. John's game or a Syracuse UConn game. They could probably work out a deal with those top level teams. But the issue with that is Syracuse is already going to be playing against tough Power 5 opponents next season in their non-con schedule. Remember that Syracuse basketball is going to play in the 2025 Vegas Players Era Tournament, which gives every team a certain amount of NIL money. I believe it's $1 million just for participating, which is huge. Some of the teams that are in that tournament include and are not limited to Alabama, Auburn, Houston, Michigan, Gonzaga, and many other elite level programs. I think St. John's is going to be there as well. So, regardless of what they decide to do as a program with their non-conference schedule next season, they just have to focus on being better as a team. Because last year, it wouldn't have mattered who they were going to play. They played against some tough teams. They played against Maryland. They got dominated. They played against Tennessee. Now, that's the ACC, SEC challenge, but they got dominated. They also played against Texas and Texas Tech, and those were actually two of the better games that Syracuse basketball played a year ago. But no matter what they decide to do, they just have to be better as a team. But I'd love to hear from you in the comments section below what you would like to see Syracuse basketball do now that it has 2 extra non-conference games next season.